Clara Whitmore dropped to her knees on the saloon floor, pressing a blood-soaked rag against her palm where the broken glass had sliced clean through. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since they pulled her father's crushed body from the mine shaft and handed her a bill for $312 in equipment damages. 3 jobs, 4 hours of sleep, and a debt that grew faster than she could pay it. That was the night a gray-eyed stranger stood up from the shadows and changed everything. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to our channel and stay until the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Clara Whitmore's hand wouldn't stop bleeding. She wrapped the dish rag tighter around her palm and kept moving. Table 6 needed clearing. Table 9 wanted whiskey, and the drunk at the bar had been staring at her for the last 20 minutes like she was something he could buy with pocket change. The Rusted Spur Saloon in Carson Flats, Nevada Territory, wasn't the kind of place that closed for a barmaid's cut hand. Wasn't the kind of place that closed for anything short of a funeral, and even then, only if the dead man had run a tab. "Clara, table 9. Hank Brubaker, the saloon owner, barked from behind the bar without looking up. He never looked up. He counted coins the way a preacher counted sins, obsessively, and with no intention of changing. "Coming," she said. She grabbed the bottle with her good hand and crossed the room. Her boots stuck to the floor where someone had spilled beer an hour ago. Nobody had mopped it. Nobody ever mopped it. That was supposed to be her job, too. But there were only so many hours between sundown and midnight, and Clara Whitmore had already used up most of hers before she'd even walked through the saloon door. She'd been up since 4 that morning. First job, the boarding house on Mineral Street. Making beds, scrubbing floors, boiling sheets that smelled like pipe smoke and regret. Mrs. Dalton, the owner, paid her $1.10 a week and acted like it was charity. Second job, Hargrove's Mercantile, stocking shelves, sweeping the storefront, smiling at women who looked through her like she was part of the wallpaper. Mr. Hargrove paid her 90 cents and docked her a nickel every time she was late, which was often because the boarding house never let her leave on time. Third job, the Rusted Spur, 6 nights a week, pouring drinks for men who thought a tip meant a comment about her waist. 3 jobs, 4 hours of sleep, and every cent, every single cent, went straight to the Silver Crest Mining Company. Because when they pulled her father's broken body from that collapsed shaft 6 months ago, they hadn't sent condolences. They'd sent an invoice. $312 in equipment damages. Her father, Samuel Whitmore, had worked that mine for 11 years. 11 years of breathing dust that turned his lungs to chalk. 11 years of crawling into tunnels that groaned like dying animals. And when the support timbers finally gave way, timbers the foreman knew were rotten, the company didn't call it negligence. They called it operator error, and they transferred the debt to his only living relative. Clara had been 22 years old, standing in a company office that smelled like ink and tobacco, when a man named Horace Pike slid the paper across the desk and told her, in a voice as flat as a stone, that she now owed the Silver Crest Mining Company for the equipment her father had destroyed in his accident. She'd stared at that paper for a long time. "My father is dead," she'd said. "Yes, ma'am," Pike had replied, "and the debt is not." That was 6 months ago. Now Clara poured whiskey for table 9 and pretended her hand wasn't throbbing. The cut was deep. She'd need to wrap it properly when she got home, if she could call that room behind the boarding house a home. A cot, a basin, a hook for her one clean dress. That was home. She turned back toward the bar and stopped. The drunk had moved. He was standing now, right in the path between the tables, and he was looking at her with a kind of smile that made her stomach tighten. She knew that smile. She'd seen it on a dozen faces in the saloon. It was the smile of a man who believed that a woman working at midnight had already made her choices. His name was Virgil Dunn. He worked for the mining company, drove ore wagons, had hands the size of dinner plates, and a reputation for not hearing the word no. "Hey there, Clara." He stepped closer. "You look tired." "I'm working, Mr. Dunn." "You're always working." He tilted his head. "When do you stop working?" "When I'm dead, apparently." She tried to step around him. He moved with her. "Now that ain't friendly," he said. "I ain't paid to be friendly. I'm paid to pour drinks." "Maybe I could pay you for something else." The words landed like a slap. Clara felt her jaw tighten. Her fingers curled around the neck of the whiskey bottle, and for one sharp second, she calculated the angle it would take to break it across his temple. But she didn't, because if she hit a customer, Hank would fire her. And if Hank fired her, she'd lose a third of her income. And if she lost a third of her income, she'd miss next month's payment to the mining company. And if she missed that payment, Horace Pike would be back at her door with another paper and another dead-eyed stare and another reminder that debt doesn't die. So she swallowed it. "Move," she said quietly. Virgil grinned. "Make me." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, the one with the cut hand. Pain screamed up her arm, the dish rag turned red, and then a chair slammed backward. The sound cracked through the saloon like a rifle shot. Every head turned. A man stood up from the corner table, tall, broad-shouldered, sunburned skin and gray eyes that looked like winter even in the middle of July. He wore a rancher's coat, dusty from trail riding, and his hat sat low enough to shadow half his face. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. "Let her go." 3 words, spoken low, spoken steady, like a man who'd said them before and had never once had to say them twice. Virgil turned, still gripping Clara's wrist. "Mind your business, stranger." The man stepped forward. 1 step. That was all. But something in the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, like a horse that knew exactly how much force it took to break a fence rail, made Virgil's grip loosen. "I said let her go." Virgil released her wrist. He stepped back, trying to look like it was his own idea. "Wasn't doing nothing, just talking." "Then talk quieter." Virgil looked around the room for support. Found none. He grabbed his hat off the bar and walked out, muttering something about outsiders and cattle stink. The saloon noise resumed. Glasses clinked, chairs scraped. Clara stood still, cradling her bleeding hand against her chest. She looked at the stranger. "I didn't need your help," she said. He looked at her hand, then at her face. He didn't smile. "I know," he said, but he didn't know that. He sat back down and returned to his coffee like nothing had happened. Clara finished her shift at midnight. She wrapped her hand with a clean strip of cotton she'd torn from her spare chemise and stepped out the back door into the dry Nevada heat. Even at midnight, the air was warm. Summer didn't let go in the high desert. It held on like a grudge. She made it 3 steps before she heard the voice. "Ma'am?" She spun. Her right hand went to the pocket where she kept a folding knife. Not much of a weapon, but enough to make a point. The stranger was leaning against the wall, hat in his hands. Up close, she could see him better. Mid-30s, hard face, but not cruel. Lines around his eyes that came from squinting into sun, not from smiling. Hands that were calloused, but clean. "You followed me," she said. I waited, he corrected. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. He nodded, like that was fair. My name is Nathaniel Callahan. Most people call me Nate. Good for most people. I own a cattle ranch about 10 miles east, 800 head, growing operation. I need someone who can manage books, track inventory, and keep the accounts honest. Clara stared at him. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a position, $45 a month, room and board included. The number hit her like cold water. $45. She made maybe 18 between all three jobs, and that was before the mining company took their cut. $45 would clear her debt in 7 months instead of 3 years. But Clara Whitmore had learned something in the 6 months since her father died. She'd learned that when something sounded too good, it was because you hadn't found the price yet. No man offers that without wanting something, she said. Nate looked at her directly. His gray eyes didn't waver. I want someone who can count straight and won't steal from me. I've had 3 bookkeepers in 2 years. First one drank, second one gambled. Third one ran off to California with $60 of my operating funds. I need someone who'll stay. And you decided that someone is the barmaid with the bleeding hand. I decided that someone is the woman working 3 jobs to pay a dead man's debt, who still had the spine to tell a drunk twice her size to move. Clara said nothing for a long moment. The desert wind pushed dust across the alley. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked.
I'll think about it, she said. I leave town day after tomorrow. Morning stage.
Then I'll think fast. She turned and walked away. She didn't look back. She could feel him watching, but she didn't look back, because looking back was what desperate people did, and Clara Whitmore refused to be desperate, even when she was. She thought about it. She thought about it while she scrubbed boarding house floors at 4 in the morning. She thought about it while she stacked canned goods at the Mercantile. She thought about it while she poured drinks at the Rusted Spur and dodged Virgil Dunn's eyes across the room. $45 a month. Room and board. A way out. But a way out to where? A ranch 10 miles from town with a man she didn't know. No neighbors close enough to hear her scream. No law close enough to come running. She'd survived this long by trusting no one. Trusting was how you got buried, like her father, under timber and rock and lies. The next morning, she went to the sheriff's office. Tom Hadley had been sheriff of Carson Flats for 12 years. He was the closest thing this town had to an honest man, which wasn't saying much, but it was saying something. Nathaniel Callahan, Clara said, standing in his doorway. What do you know? Hadley leaned back in his chair. Callahan, Texas man. Lost his spread down south to drought and railroad trouble. Came up here 3 years ago. Bought land east of town. Built it up, honest. Pays his hands fair. Doesn't drink much. Doesn't fight unless pushed. Any trouble with women? Hadley looked at her carefully. None that I've heard, and I would have heard. You trust him? I trust him more than most men in this territory, which, I grant you, is a low bar. Clara nodded. Thank you, Sheriff. Clara. He stopped her at the door. Whatever you're considering, be careful. Being smart ain't the same as being safe. I know, she said, but being careful ain't the same as being free. She went to the bank next. Martin Foss, the bank manager, confirmed what the sheriff had said. Callahan's accounts were solid. His credit was good. He paid his debts on time and didn't borrow more than he could cover. Respectable man, Foss said. Quiet. Doesn't throw money around. The kind of rancher this territory needs more of. Clara thanked him and left. That afternoon, she found one of Callahan's ranch hands drinking coffee at the Mercantile counter.
Young man named Billy Pruitt. Couldn't have been more than 19. Freckled. Earnest. The kind of boy who hadn't yet learned to lie convincingly. "You work for Callahan?" Clara asked. Billy nodded. "Yes, ma'am. 2 years now. He treat you fair?" "More than fair. Pays on time, feeds us good. Built a bunkhouse with actual beds, not just hay pallets. Gave me a bonus at Christmas. He ever raise a hand to anyone?" Billy frowned. "Mr. Callahan? No, ma'am. He's strict, but he ain't mean. Only time I seen him angry was when a hand mistreated a horse. Fired the man on the spot. Didn't yell, just told him to pack and pointed at the road." Clara studied the boy's face. No hesitation. No rehearsal. Just the plain truth of a young man who hadn't yet learned to complicate it. "Thank you, Billy." "Yes, ma'am. You thinking about coming out to the ranch?" "Maybe." Billy grinned. "We could sure use someone who can keep the books. Last fellow was a disaster." That night, Clara sat on the edge of her cot and stared at the wall. The numbers didn't lie. At her current rate, she'd need 3 more years to pay off the mining company. 3 years of 4 hours of sleep. 3 years of Virgil Dunn and men like him. 3 years of watching her body wear down like a blade sharpened too many times. Or 7 months. 7 months at Callahan's ranch and the debt would be gone. But there was the other number. The one that mattered more than money. 10 miles. 10 miles from town. 10 miles from the sheriff. 10 miles from anyone who might notice if something went wrong. Clara reached under her cot and pulled out the small revolver she'd bought with 2 weeks' pay 3 months ago. A Smith & Wesson pocket pistol. 5 shots. Not much, but enough. She checked the cylinder. Loaded. She slid it back under the pillow. Then she pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. She found Nate Callahan at the hotel the next morning, sitting on the front porch with a cup of coffee and a newspaper he didn't seem to be reading. "I have conditions," Clara said. He folded the paper. "I'm listening." Written contract, signed by both parties, filed with the sheriff. Agreed. 6-month minimum term. Either party can terminate with 30 days' notice. Fair. My wages are mine, every cent. No deductions for room or board. That's part of the arrangement. And no one, not you, not any foreman, not any company man, touches my earnings without my written consent. Nate looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. "You've dealt with people who take what isn't theirs," he said. "I've dealt with people who call theft a policy. Are we agreed?" "We're agreed. One more thing." Clara held his gaze. "If I leave freely. No penalty, no retaliation, no sudden discovery that I owe you for something I didn't know I was paying for." Nate was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Miss Whitmore, I've been on the wrong end of a rigged deal myself. Lost a ranch to it. I don't do business that way." "Words are cheap, Mr. Callahan." "Then let the contract speak for me." They shook hands. His grip was firm but careful. He'd noticed the bandage. "Stage leaves at 7 tomorrow," he said. "I'll be on it." She turned to leave. "Miss Whitmore." She stopped. "For what it's worth," Nate said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Clara looked back at him. Not desperate, not grateful, just clear. "I'm not looking for anything, Mr. Callahan. I'm looking to stop losing." That evening, Clara paid her last visit to Horace Pike. The mining company office sat at the end of Main Street, like a sore that wouldn't heal. Brick front, iron door, a sign that read, "Silver Crest Mining Company, authorized personnel only." as if the whole town didn't already know what happened behind that door. Pike was at his desk, as always. Thin man, thin lips, thin patience. He wore spectacles that made his eyes look like a fish's, round and flat, and utterly without warmth. "Miss Whitmore?" He didn't look up. "Your payment is not due until Friday." "I'm aware. I'm here to inform you that I'll be leaving Carson Flats." Now he looked up. "Leaving?" "I've taken a position outside of town. My payments will continue by mail."
Pike removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a cloth. It was the kind of gesture that was supposed to look casual, but was actually designed to make you wait. "Miss Whitmore, your debt agreement requires that you maintain employment within the township of Carson Flats."
"Show me where it says that."
Pike paused. "It's understood."
"Understood by who? Because I've read that agreement 4 times, Mr. Pike, and it says I owe $312 at 6% annual interest, payable in monthly installments. It says nothing about where I work."
Pike's jaw tightened. "The company prefers to maintain proximity to its debtors."
"The company can prefer whatever it likes. I'm telling you as a courtesy."
"And if your payments stop?"
"They won't."
"And if they do?"
Clara leaned forward.
Her voice dropped, and something hard came into her eyes. Something that had been building for 6 months, compressed under exhaustion and grief and the daily humiliation of being treated like a number on a ledger.
"Then you'll have to come find me, Mr. Pike. And I reckon that's a conversation neither of us wants to have."
She left without waiting for a response.
Pike sat very still for a long time after she'd gone.
Then he opened a drawer, removed a file marked Whitmore, Samuel, deceased, and began to write. The morning stage left at 7 sharp. Clara carried 1 bag, 1 dress, 1 pair of work boots, the revolver in her coat pocket, and every dollar she'd saved tucked into a leather pouch sewn into her corset. Because a woman who trusted banks with her survival money hadn't been paying attention. Nate was already at the stage stop, loading supplies onto the wagon that would carry them from the main road to the ranch. He nodded when he saw her. "Morning, Miss Whitmore."
"Morning, Mr. Callahan."
Neither of them smiled. This wasn't a beginning that called for smiling. This was 2 people making a calculated decision in a territory that didn't forgive miscalculation. The wagon pulled away from Carson Flats as the sun climbed over the eastern ridge. The air was already warm. By noon, it would be brutal. Clara sat on the bench seat beside Nate, her bag between her feet, and watched the town shrink behind them. The boarding house, the mercantile, the saloon, the mining company office. She didn't look back. She'd already decided. Whatever came next, it would be forward. Even if forward meant 10 miles of open desert, with a man she barely knew, and a contract she hoped would hold. Because hope was a luxury Clara Whitmore had stopped affording. But a plan she could work with. The wagon hit a rut, and Clara grabbed the seat rail. Her bandaged hand screamed, but she didn't make a sound. She'd trained herself out of that, making sounds when things hurt. Sounds invited questions, and questions invited pity. And pity was just another word for someone deciding you couldn't handle your own life. Nate glanced at her hand. "That needs proper cleaning." "It's fine." "It's not fine. It's soaked through the bandage." "Mr. Callahan, I've been managing my own injuries since I was 14. I'll manage this one." He didn't push. He just clicked his tongue at the horses and kept driving. They rode in silence for nearly an hour. Clara counted the distance in her head. 5 miles. 6. 7. Each mile was another mile from the sheriff, from the mercantile, from anything she recognized. Her fingers found the shape of the revolver through her coat pocket, and she let them rest there. "You keep touching that pocket," Nate said without looking at her.
Clara stiffened. Habit. That's a smart habit for a woman traveling alone. He paused.
You won't need it if the ranch, but I won't ask you to give it up. You couldn't if you tried. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the memory of one. No, ma'am, I reckon I couldn't. They crested a low ridge, and the ranch spread out below. But Clara didn't care about the buildings or the land. She cared about the 3 men standing by the corral fence, watching the wagon approach. 3 strangers. 3 men she didn't know, on land she'd never seen, 10 miles from anyone who'd notice if she disappeared. Her hand tightened on the revolver. Nate pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. Boys, this is Miss Clara Whitmore. She's our new bookkeeper. You'll treat her with the same respect you'd treat your mothers, and if any of you didn't respect your mothers, you'll treat her better. The youngest one, Billy Pruitt, the freckled boy from the mercantile, grinned. Welcome, Miss Whitmore. I told you we needed somebody. The second man, older, maybe 40, with a thick mustache and arms like fence posts, tipped his hat. Earl Dawson, ma'am. Foreman. Anything you need, you ask. The third man didn't tip his hat. He was lean, dark-haired, and looked at Clara the way a dog looks at a cat that just walked into its yard. Jem Sutter, he said. I do cattle work, not bookkeeping. Nobody asked you to do bookkeeping, Jem, Nate said, and something in his tone shut the conversation down like a gate slamming. Clara stepped off the wagon without help. She'd memorized the layout already. Main house, bunkhouse, barn, a smaller building that looked like an office. She pointed at it. That where the books are? Nate nodded. Last bookkeeper left them in a state. Might take a few days to sort through. Show me. He led her to the office. The desk was buried under ledgers, receipts, and loose papers that looked like they'd been organized by a windstorm. Clara set her bag down, pulled out the chair, and sat. She opened the first ledger. The numbers were wrong before she finished the second page. Mr. Callahan. Yeah? Your last bookkeeper didn't just run off with $60. He was skimming for months. These feed invoices are doubled. You've been paying for grain you never received. Nate stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his jaw tightened. How much? Clara ran her finger down the columns. I'll need a full day to audit, but at a glance, closer to $200. $200. At least. Nate was quiet for a long moment. Then he exhaled through his nose, a slow, controlled breath that Clara recognized. It was the sound of a man who wanted to hit something, but had decided a long time ago that hitting things didn't fix them. Can you track where it went? If the invoices have names, I can trace the vendors. If any of them are real, they'll have records. If they're fake, that tells us something too. Do it. He turned to leave, then stopped. Miss Whitmore. Yes? Thank you for being honest about it. Last man would have buried it deeper. I don't bury things, Mr. Callahan. I dig them up. He looked at her for a beat longer than necessary, then walked out. Clara turned back to the ledger. Her hand was still bleeding through the bandage. She ignored it and kept counting. By the end of the first week, Clara had rebuilt the ranch's books from scratch. She'd identified $187 in fraudulent charges, traced 3 fake vendor names back to a saloon in Virginia City, and created a new filing system that even Billy Pruitt could follow. She'd also learned 3 things about the ranch. First, Nate Callahan ran a tight operation, but he ran it on trust, and that trust had been exploited. He needed systems, not just good intentions. Second, Earl Dawson was exactly what he appeared to be, a reliable, steady man who did his work and said little. He was the kind of foreman who noticed everything and commented on nothing. Third, Jem Sutter didn't like her.
He didn't say it outright. He was too smart for that. But Clara caught the looks, the way his eyes followed her when she crossed the yard, the way he went quiet when she entered a room, the way he talked to Nate a little louder when she was nearby, as if marking territory.
On the 8th day, she found out why. She was in the office reconciling cattle sale receipts when Jem appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame and watched her work. "You eat supper with us tonight?" he asked. "I eat in the office. I have work." "Nate says you should eat with the crew. Says it's better for, what do you call it? Cohesion." "Mr. Callahan can tell me that himself." Jem stepped inside. One step. Clara's hand moved off the desk and into her lap, closer to the pocket where she kept her knife during work hours. "You know what I think?" Jem said. "I didn't ask." "I think you're real good at playing scared. I think you keep that knife and that little pistol close because it makes people careful around you. But I think if someone actually called your bluff, you'd fold." Clara stood up. She was a full head shorter than Jem Sutter, but she looked up at him without blinking. "Mister?" "Sutter, I've been bluffed by mining company lawyers, threatened by drunks twice your size, and cheated by men who wore better suits than you'll ever own. If you think you're the scariest thing I've met this month, you haven't been paying attention." Jem's smirk faltered, just for a second. Then he shrugged and backed out of the doorway. "Just making conversation, Miss Whitmore." "Make it somewhere else." He left. Clara sat back down. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline that came after standing your ground and not knowing if the ground would hold. She waited until she was sure he was gone. Then she picked up the pen and went back to the numbers. She told Nate that night, not because she needed protection, because she needed information. "Sutter," she said, standing on the porch while Nate cleaned tack by lamplight. "What's his story?" Nate didn't look up. "Good cattleman, knows the land, knows the work." "That's not what I asked." Now he looked up. "What happened?" "Nothing I couldn't handle, but I want to know who I'm handling." Nate set down the bridle. "Jem's been with me since I started this ranch. He's loyal. He's also got a chip on his shoulder the size of a barn door. He doesn't like change, and he sure doesn't like being told what to do by someone who hasn't sat a horse." "I'm not telling him what to do. I'm doing my job." "I know that. He'll figure it out." "And if he doesn't?" Nate looked at her steadily. "Then he'll answer to me. But I'd rather give a man the chance to be decent before I decide he can't be." Clara studied his face. She'd been studying it for a week now, and she still couldn't find the lie. That bothered her more than anything. Liars, she understood. Honest men were unpredictable. "You're a strange rancher, Mr. Callahan." "I'm a tired rancher, Miss Whitmore. There's a difference." The heat got worse in the second week. The creek that fed the ranch dropped to a trickle. Cattle crowded the water holes, and the ones on the far range started losing weight. Nate rode out every morning before dawn and came back after dark. And each day, the lines around his eyes got a little deeper. Clara watched the water levels in the ledger like a surgeon watching a patient's pulse. The numbers told a story the land was already telling. This summer was going to be brutal, and the ranch didn't have enough reserve to survive a full drought. She brought it to Nate on a Tuesday evening. He was sitting on the porch step, too tired to go inside, holding the cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "We have a problem," she said. "I know." "You know the water's dropping, but do you know the numbers behind it?" He looked at her. Clara sat beside him. Not close, a businesslike distance. She opened the ledger on her knee. "At current consumption, your herd will exceed your water capacity in 3 weeks. You'll start losing cattle by August. If you sell now, strategic, not desperate,
You can reduce the herd by a third and make it through the summer with enough stock to rebuild in fall. Sell a third of my herd. Sell a third now and keep 2/3 alive. Or keep all of them and lose half to thirst. Nate stared at the ledger. The numbers were clean. The math was irrefutable. And Clara could see in his face the particular anguish of a man being told to cut off his own hand to save his arm. "I built this herd from nothing," he said quietly. "I know. Every one of those cattle represents a year of work. I know that too, but the drought doesn't care about your work, Mr. Callahan. It only cares about water." He was silent for a long time. The sun was going down, and the heat was finally easing, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote started its evening howl. "Which ones?" he finally asked. "I've already sorted the herd by age, weight, and market value. I can have a sale plan ready by morning." He looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, Clara saw something in his eyes that wasn't gratitude or surprise or even respect. It was relief. The relief of a man who'd been carrying a weight alone and suddenly realized someone else had put their shoulder under it. "Morning," he said. "I'll look at it in the morning." "Yes, sir." She stood to leave. His voice stopped her. "Clara." It was the first time he'd used her first name. She turned. "Yeah?" "When you were working 3 jobs, did anyone ever tell you you were good at what you do?" The question hit a place she didn't expect. Somewhere under the armor. Somewhere soft. "No," she said. "They mostly told me I was slow." "You're not slow. You're the fastest mind I've ever seen with a ledger." She didn't know what to do with that. Compliments from men had always come wrapped in conditions. This one didn't seem to have any. "Good night, Mr. Callahan." "Good night, Clara." She walked to her room in the small addition off the main house. The room he'd given her with a lock on the inside and a window that opened. She'd checked both the first night. The lock worked. The window was big enough to climb through. She hadn't needed either one. And that, more than any compliment, was the thing she didn't know what to do with. The cattle sale went through the following week. Nate drove 112 head to the auction in Elko with Earl and Billy. Clara stayed at the ranch with Jem Sutter and 2 day laborers. The first day was fine. Jem kept his distance. The laborers were polite. Clara worked in the office and kept the door open. The second day, Horace Pike arrived. Clara heard the horse before she saw the rider. She stepped onto the porch and felt her stomach drop. Pike dismounted with the precision of a man who calculated every movement. He wore the same dark coat he always wore, the same spectacles, the same expression of bureaucratic contempt. "Miss Whitmore," he said, tying his horse to the post. "I've come to discuss your account." "My account is current. I mailed the payment last week." "I received it. However, the company has reviewed your arrangement and has some concerns." "Concerns?" Pike reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "It has come to our attention that you are now employed by Mr. Nathaniel Callahan at a substantially higher wage than your previous positions. As such, the company is adjusting your monthly payment upward to reflect your improved circumstances." Clara took the paper. She read it once, then again. "You're doubling my payment?" "We're adjusting it proportionally." "Based on what authority?" "Based on the discretionary clause in your debt agreement. Section 4, paragraph... Section 4, paragraph 2 states that adjustments may be made in cases of material change in debtor's financial position. It does not define material change. It does not specify a formula. And it was written to be vague enough to justify exactly this kind of extortion. Pike blinked. It was the most emotion Clara had ever seen from him. "You've memorized the agreement," he said. "I've memorized every word of every paper your company has ever put in front of me, Mr. Pike."
"Because the last time I trusted your company's paperwork, my father ended up dead, and I ended up in debt." Pike's composure returned. He straightened his spectacles. "The adjustment stands. You may appeal to the company office in writing, but until a ruling is made, the new amount is due." "And if I refuse?" "Then the company will pursue wage garnishment through the territorial courts, including a claim against any assets associated with your current employment." Clara went cold. Not afraid. Cold. The kind of cold that comes before you do something you can't take back. "You're threatening to attach Mr. Callahan's ranch assets to my personal debt." "I'm informing you of the company's legal options." "You're threatening a man who has nothing to do with this." "He employed you, Miss Whitmore. That creates an association. The company's lawyers are quite thorough." Clara stared at him. Pike stared back. Behind his spectacles, his fish eyes were flat and steady and completely without mercy. "Get off this property," Clara said. "I beg your—" "You are standing on land that belongs to Nathaniel Callahan. You are not authorized personnel. You have no warrant and no court order. Get off this property before I exercise Mr. Callahan's right to remove trespassers, which in Nevada territory includes the use of reasonable force." Pike looked past her. Jem Sutter was standing by the corral, watching. The two laborers had stopped working. Pike folded his hands. "I'll leave, but the notice stands. You have 30 days. He mounted his horse, turned it toward the road, and rode away without looking back. Clara stood on the porch until he was out of sight. Then she went inside, closed the office door, sat down at the desk, and pressed both hands flat against the wood until they stopped shaking. Not from fear, from rage. They were trying to use her to get to Nate. They were trying to make her a liability, to turn the one good thing she'd found into another weapon they could swing. She opened the ledger. Not the ranch ledger, her personal one. The one where she tracked every payment, every interest calculation, every penny she'd given to the Silver Crest Mining Company. She'd been keeping a second set of numbers, too. Numbers that didn't add up. Interest charges that didn't match the stated rate. Fees that appeared from nowhere. Payment credits that arrived late. She'd noticed the discrepancies weeks ago, but hadn't said anything. Hadn't been sure enough. Hadn't wanted to believe that the company wasn't just cruel, but crooked. Now she was sure. Clara pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the desk drawer. She dipped the pen, and she began to build her case. Nate returned 3 days later with less cattle and more cash. The sale had gone well, better than expected. He was almost in a good mood when he climbed down from the wagon. Then he saw Clara's face. "What happened?" he said. She told him everything. The visit, the adjusted payment, the threat against his assets. Pike's words, delivered with the precision of a surgeon cutting into something vital. Nate listened without interrupting. His face changed as she talked. Not dramatically, not the way a man looks when he's performing anger. Quietly, the way rock changes when water freezes inside it. Slow, deep, permanent. "He threatened my ranch," Nate said when she finished. "He threatened to use the courts to attach your assets to my debt. It's a pressure tactic. I don't know if it would hold legally, but the cost of fighting it, Clara..." She stopped. "He came to my property while I was gone. He threatened my ranch. And he did it to scare you into paying more money on a debt that shouldn't exist in the first place. I can handle it. I know you can handle it. That ain't the point.
Then what's the point? Nate took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. The point is that a man came to my home and threatened someone under my roof. And if I let that stand, it tells every company man and claim jumper in the territory that this ranch doesn't protect its own. I'm not yours to protect. You're on my land. You work for me. That makes you mine to protect whether you like it or not. That's not about you being a woman. That's about me being a man who doesn't let people get bullied on his property. Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, because she realized something she hadn't expected to realize. Not about him, about herself. She'd spent so long fighting alone that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside her. Not in front of her, not instead of her, beside her. It was terrifying.
I found something, she said quietly.
Found what?
Discrepancies. In the mining company's books. My payment records don't match their stated terms. Interest charges are wrong. Fees are fabricated. I think they've been overcharging every debtor on their rolls.
Nate stared at her. You can prove it?
Not yet. I need to see their ledgers, or find other debtors with the same pattern. If I can show a systematic discrepancy, it's not an error. It's fraud.
And if it's fraud?
Then the debt isn't just unjust. It's illegal, and I can take it to the territorial courts.
Nate was quiet for a long time. The evening heat pressed down on the porch like a hand. What do you need from me? He said. Clara looked at him. This was the moment. The moment where she could pull back, stay safe, handle it alone the way she always had. Or she could trust someone for the first time since her father died.
Time, she said, and access to your contacts in town.
I need to find other miners' families, other people the company has billed. I know people, ranchers, merchants, a few miners' widows on the west side of Carson Flats. Then that's where we start. Nate put his hat back on. We? Clara met his gaze. You said someone on your property got threatened. That makes it your fight too. Isn't that what you just told me? Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something warmer. Yeah, he said. That's what I told you. Then we start tomorrow. Tomorrow. Clara turned and walked back to the office. At the door, she paused. Mr. Callahan. Yeah? The cattle sale. The numbers work out? Better than expected. Your plan saved us. She nodded once. Good. Then we can afford to fight. She went inside and closed the door. Nate stood on the porch alone, looking out at the darkening land. And for the first time in 3 years, the weight on his shoulders felt like something he could actually carry. Clara found the first widow on a Wednesday. Her name was Ruth Hennessy. 41 years old. Husband dead 14 months from a cave-in at Silver Crest's number 3 shaft. She lived in a 2-room shack on the west edge of Carson Flats, with 4 children under the age of 10, and she owed the mining company $228 in equipment liability. Clara rode into town alone. Nate had offered to come. She'd said no. A rancher showing up at a widow's door would look like charity. A woman showing up alone would look like solidarity. Clara understood the difference because she'd been on both sides of it. Ruth Hennessy opened her door with a baby on her hip and suspicion on her face. Whatever you're selling, I can't buy it. I'm not selling anything. My name is Clara Whitmore, Samuel Whitmore's daughter. Ruth's expression changed, not softened, shifted, the way a guard dog shifts when it recognizes a familiar scent.
I heard about your father,
Ruth said.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry about your husband. They looked at each other. 2 women standing on opposite sides of a doorframe, connected by the same company that had taken everything from both of them.
May I come in?
Clara asked. Ruth stepped aside. The children were quiet. The oldest, A girl of maybe 9 was peeling potatoes at a table that wobbled on 3 good legs and 1 propped-up brick. Clara sat across from Ruth and laid it out plain. "How much do you pay Silver Crest every month?" $12. "At what interest rate?" They said 6%. "Do you have your payment records?" Ruth laughed. It was the kind of laugh that had no humor in it. "They don't give me records. I pay at the office. The clerk marks it in this book. That's it." "They don't give you receipts?" "Never have." Clara felt something tighten behind her ribs. "Mrs. Hennessy, they give me receipts. I demanded them from the first payment."
"And those receipts don't match the terms of my agreement. The interest charges are wrong. There are fees that don't appear in the original contract." Ruth stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they're stealing from us. Not just collecting a debt, inflating it, adding charges that don't exist. And they're doing it because they know most people don't keep records and can't afford a lawyer." Ruth's hand tightened on the baby. "Even if that's true, what can we do? They own the courts. They own the sheriff. Well, maybe not Hadley, but they own everyone around him. They don't own the territorial judge, and they don't own the truth if we can prove it." "Prove it how?" "I need your payment history, every date, every amount, whatever you can remember. And I need the names of every other widow, every other family the company has billed." Ruth was quiet for a long time. The baby fussed. The girl at the table stopped peeling and watched. "There's Margaret Boone," Ruth said finally. "Her husband died in the same shaft as mine. And old Mrs. Carver, her son was killed last spring. And there's a woman up north, I don't know her name, but I heard she owes even more than I do." "Can you take me to them?" "Why are you doing this?" Clara looked at the children, at the wobbling table, at the peeled potatoes that would probably be dinner for all 6 of them. "Because my father died in their mine, and they charged me for the privilege." Ruth set the baby down in a basket by the stove. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Margaret lives 2 streets over. We can go now." In 4 days, Clara had 7 names, 7 families, 7 dead miners, 7 deaths that didn't add up. She sat in the ranch office at midnight, cross-referencing every number she'd gathered against her own records, and the pattern was as clear as a cattle brand on a white hide. Silver Crest was charging an average of 18% interest, while claiming 6%. They were adding administrative fees of between $8 and $15 per quarter that appeared nowhere in any original agreement. And they were applying payments to fees first and principal last, which meant the actual debt barely shrank no matter how much people paid. It was systematic. It was deliberate. And it had been going on for years. Nate found her at the desk at 2 in the morning. She hadn't heard him come in. She was staring at a column of numbers that proved what she already knew. And when he said her name, she flinched. "You need sleep," he said. "I need a lawyer." "At 2 in the morning? I need one who isn't owned by the company. There must be someone in the territory who'll take this case." Nate leaned against the doorframe. "There's a man in Elko. Name's Doyle. Arthur Doyle. He handled a land dispute for a rancher friend of mine last year. Fair man. Not cheap, but not bought either. Can you get word to him? I can ride to Elko on Thursday." "It can't wait until Thursday." "Clara." His voice was steady, not patronizing, steady. "You've built something here. 7 witnesses, a paper trail, a pattern. But if you rush it, you'll make a mistake, and the company's lawyers will eat that mistake alive." She knew he was right. She hated that he was right. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday.
Now get some sleep." She didn't get some sleep. She went to her room and sat on the bed and stared at the wall and ran the numbers again in her head. $312. That was her father's life, reduced to a figure on a ledger. And that figure was a lie. Everything they'd charged her was a lie. She pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars, and when she pulled them away, her face was wet. She hadn't cried since the day they told her about the shaft collapse. She cried now, quietly. With her door locked and her window open and the desert night pressing in like something that was trying to listen. Then she washed her face, dried her eyes, and went back to the numbers. Nate rode to Elko on Thursday. He came back Saturday with Arthur Doyle behind him on a rented horse. Doyle was not what Clara expected. She'd expected old. He was maybe 40. She'd expected fancy. He wore a plain brown suit that had seen better days and boots that had seen worse ones. But his eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp that came from reading contracts the way a tracker reads ground, looking for what doesn't belong. Clara laid everything out on the office desk. 7 families, 7 debt agreements, her own receipts, the interest calculations, the phantom fees, the payment application scheme. Doyle read for 2 hours without speaking. Clara stood by the window. Nate sat on the porch. Nobody said a word. When Doyle finally looked up, his expression was the carefully controlled blank of a man who has seen something ugly and is deciding how to describe it. "Miss Whitmore, how long did it take you to compile this?" 4 weeks. "And you have no legal training."
I have arithmetic. The numbers don't require a law degree to understand.
"No, they don't." Doyle removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "What you've documented here is usury, plain and simple. Nevada territory caps interest at 10% for personal debts. Silver Crest is charging nearly triple that through a combination of hidden fees and fraudulent compounding. It's illegal, it's systematic, and based on the number of families involved, it's large enough to warrant a territorial investigation." Clara's heart was hammering. She kept her voice even. "What do we do?" "We file a formal complaint with the territorial court in Carson City. We request an order compelling the company to produce its internal ledgers, and we petition for a public hearing." "How long?" "If the judge moves quickly, and Judge Harlan in Carson City has no love for mining companies, we could have a hearing date within 6 weeks." 6 weeks, Clara exhaled.
Pike gave me 30 days to pay the adjusted amount. That was 18 days ago. Then we need to file an emergency injunction to freeze all collection activities while the case is pending. I can draft it tonight and ride to Carson City Monday morning.
"Will it hold?" Doyle looked at her directly. "If the judge sees what I just saw, it'll hold. But I want you to understand something, Miss Whitmore. The moment we file, the company will know. And companies like Silver Crest don't fight in courtrooms. They fight in alleys and offices and quiet conversations with people who owe them favors. I know what they are. Do you know what they'll do to you?" Clara thought about Pike's flat eyes, about Foreman Crow, whose name she'd heard whispered in connection with 2 other accidents at the mine, about the way the company operated. Not with violence exactly, but with the constant grinding pressure of a machine that didn't care what it crushed.
"They'll try to scare me," she said. "They'll threaten the ranch. They'll threaten Nate. They'll find everyone I've talked to and lean on them until someone breaks. And I've been scared since the day my father died. It hasn't stopped me yet."
Doyle almost smiled. "I'll take the case. My fee is $40, payable after resolution." "I can pay you after resolution," If we lose, you owe me nothing. If we win, the company pays court costs and restitution, and you can pay me out of that." Clara extended her hand. "Deal." They shook on it.
The company found out in 11 days. Clara was in town buying supplies when she saw Foreman Ezekiel Crow for the first time. She'd heard his name plenty. The ranch hands mentioned him the way people mention bad weather, as something you endured rather than confronted. But she'd never stood face to face with him until he stepped out of the mining company office and blocked her path on the boardwalk. Crow was a big man, not tall like Nate, wide, built like a barrel that someone had taught to walk and given a bad temper. His face was weathered the color of old leather, and his eyes sat deep in his skull, like two things hiding. "You're the Whitmore girl," he said. "I'm Miss Whitmore, and you're in my way." "I hear you've been talking to folks, stirring up trouble." "I've been talking to widows about money your company stole from them." Crow stepped closer. He smelled like coal dust and chewing tobacco, and the particular sourness of a man who'd been angry so long he'd forgotten what he was angry about. "Your daddy was a careless man, Miss Whitmore. Careless men cause accidents, and careless daughters—" "Finish that sentence." Crow stopped. Not because Clara's voice was loud, because it was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before something breaks. "My father worked your mine for 11 years, Clara said. "He crawled into shafts that you knew were unsafe. He breathed dust that you knew was killing him. And when the timbers gave way, timbers that 3 men had reported as rotten, your company called it his fault and sent me the bill." "That's the company's position." "That's a lie, and I can prove it." Crow's jaw worked like he was chewing on something tough. "You think a territorial judge is going to side with a barmaid over a mining company? I think a territorial judge is going to side with 7 families and the paper trail that proves systematic fraud. But I guess we'll find out." "You don't know what you're starting, girl." "I know exactly what I'm starting. The question is whether your company knows how to finish it without breaking the law. Because so far, their record on that ain't impressive." Crow leaned in, close enough that Clara could see the tobacco stains on his teeth. People who make trouble for Silver Crest have a way of finding trouble themselves. Just something to keep in mind. "Is that a threat, Mr. Crow?" "It's an observation." "Then here's one of mine. I've filed documents with the territorial court, copies with the sheriff, and a sealed letter with a lawyer in Elko that opens if anything happens to me or any of the families I represent. So if you're planning to solve this problem the way you solved the problem of rotten timbers, by burying it, you should know that this time it won't stay buried." Crow stared at her for a long 5 seconds. Then he stepped aside. Clara walked past him without quickening her pace. She made it to the end of the boardwalk, turned the corner, and leaned against the wall of the feed store. Her whole body was shaking. She gave herself 10 seconds. Then she straightened up, picked up her supply list, and walked into the store. They came for the widows first. 3 days after Clara's encounter with Crow, Ruth Hennessy found a notice nailed to her door. Immediate payment in full or forfeiture of personal property. Ruth came to the ranch in a borrowed wagon, holding the notice in one hand and her baby in the other. And she was crying the way people cry when they've been brave for too long and finally run out. "They're taking my things," Ruth said. "The table, the chairs, my husband's tools, everything." Clara took the notice and read it. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. Everything inside her was a wildfire. "This notice isn't legal," Clara said. "They can't seize property without a court order.
And there is no court order because we have a pending injunction. This is intimidation. It doesn't feel like intimidation. It feels like they're going to kick down my door. They're not going to kick down your door. I'm going to talk to the sheriff. The sheriff can't. The sheriff is the only law in this town, and Hadley is the one honest man in it. He'll enforce the injunction. Clara rode to town within the hour. She found Hadley at his desk and put the notice in front of him. This was nailed to Ruth Hennessy's door this morning. There is a pending injunction filed with the territorial court freezing all collection activities by Silver Crest Mining Company. This notice violates that injunction. Hadley read it slowly. Clara, I enforce local law. Territorial injunctions are enforceable by any sworn officer in the territory. Section 12 of the Nevada Territorial Code. I looked it up. Hadley put down the notice. You looked it up. I look everything up, Sheriff. Are you going to enforce this or not? He leaned back. He was quiet for a long time. Clara could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. The weighing of duty against survival, of law against the practical reality of a mining company that employed half the town. If I go to that company office and tell Crow to stand down, I'm making an enemy of the biggest employer in Carson Flats. If you don't, you're making an enemy of the law. And last I checked, that badge means you chose a side. Hadley looked at her. Then he stood up, put on his hat, and reached for the shotgun on the wall rack. Let's go talk to Mr. Crow. The confrontation at the mining office lasted 12 minutes. Clara stood outside with her arms crossed while Hadley went in. She heard raised voices. Crow's, thick and threatening. Hadley's, steady and flat. Then silence. Then the sound of a chair being pushed back. Hadley came out first. Crow followed, standing in the doorway with his face the color of raw beef. The notices will be withdrawn, Hadley said to Clara. And the other families? All of them, pending the court hearing. Crow pointed at Clara. His finger was thick as a sausage, and it trembled with rage. This ain't over. No, Clara said. It's just getting started. She turned and walked to her horse. Hadley walked with her. Clara, he said quietly, watch your back. I mean it. Crow's the kind of man who smiles while he loads a gun. I know what kind of man he is. Do you know what kind of company he works for? Silver Crest has connections in Carson City. Political connections.
The kind that can make a court case disappear. Then we'd better make sure this one is too loud to disappear. The hearing date came faster than anyone expected. Judge Harlan, true to Doyle's prediction, had no patience for mining company fraud. He scheduled the public hearing for the last week of July, right in the dead center of the worst heat the territory had seen in a decade. Clara spent every waking hour preparing. She organized the testimony of all 7 families. She created a master ledger showing the systematic overcharges. She compiled a timeline of every threat, every fraudulent notice, every intimidation tactic the company had used. And she found something else, something she hadn't been looking for. It was buried in the company's original incorporation documents, which Doyle had obtained through the court order. A clause that required the company to maintain safety inspection records for all active shafts. Records that were supposed to be filed annually with the Territorial Mining Commission. Clara pulled the commission's public records.
Silver Crest had not filed a safety inspection in 3 years. 3 years, during which 4 men had died in shaft collapses, including her father. She brought the documents to Nate at 10 o'clock at night. He was cleaning his rifle at the kitchen table, and when he saw her face,
He set the gun down. "What is it?"
They haven't filed safety inspections in 3 years. The shafts that collapsed, the ones that killed my father, Ruth's husband, all of them, were never inspected. The company was legally required to inspect them annually, and they didn't.
"What does that mean?"
It means the collapses weren't just negligent, they were predictable. The company knew those shafts were dangerous and chose to keep operating them, because shutting them down would have cost money.
Nate's face went very still. "That's not fraud, that's
criminal negligence resulting in death. 4 counts.
The words sat between them like something with weight. Clara's hands were shaking again, not from rage this time, from the enormity of what she was holding.
This changes everything, Nate said. I know. This isn't about debt anymore. This is about people dying. I know. Clara, if you present this at the hearing, the company won't just fight you in court. They'll fight you with everything they have. She sat down across from him. She put her hands flat on the table to stop them from trembling. My father went into that mine every day for 11 years. He went in knowing it was dangerous. He went in because he had a daughter to feed and no other options. And when the company killed him, because that's what they did, Nate, they killed him. They sent me the bill. They looked me in the eye and told me I owed them money for the equipment he destroyed when their mine crushed him to death. Her voice broke on the last word. She pressed her lips together and waited until she had control again. I'm presenting it. All of it. Every number, every document, every lie.
And if they come after me, they'd better bring more than threats, because I have the truth, and I have the math, and I have 7 families who deserve to know why their husbands and fathers and sons aren't coming home. Nate reached across the table. He didn't take her hand. He put his hand palm up on the wood, halfway between them. An offer, not a demand. Clara looked at his hand. Calloused, steady, open. She put her hand in his. It was the first time they'd touched since the handshake on the hotel porch. His fingers closed around hers, gentle, firm, warm. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them needed to. The morning of the hearing, Clara woke before dawn. She dressed in the one good dress she owned, dark blue, high collar, clean but not new. She pinned her hair back. She put the revolver in her pocket out of habit, then took it out and left it on the bed. Today, she wouldn't need a weapon. Today, she had something better. Nate had the wagon ready. Earl Dawson drove. Billy Pruitt sat in the back, looking nervous. Even Jem Sutter had come, though he sat at the far end of the wagon and said nothing. He'd been quieter these past weeks. Something had changed in the way he looked at Clara. Not warmer, exactly, but different. Like a man reassessing a hand of cards he'd misjudged. The town square was packed. Word had spread. Not just the 7 families. Half of Carson Flats had turned out. Miners still working the shafts, standing in the back with their hats in their hands. Merchants who'd watched the company squeeze the life out of their customers for years. Women who'd buried husbands and sons and brothers and been handed invoices at the graveside. Judge Harlan sat behind a table on the courthouse porch. He was a lean man with white hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved out of patience and very little else. Horace Pike sat to the right, representing the company. Beside him sat a man Clara had never seen. Tall, well-dressed, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd never lost a case because he'd never taken one he couldn't buy. Company lawyer, Doyle murmured to Clara. Name's Garrett. Territorial counsel. They brought in the big gun. Good, Clara said. That means we scared them. The hearing began. Garrett spoke first. Smooth. Polished. Every sentence designed to make the debt agreement sound reasonable, the fees sound standard, the company sound patient and generous with struggling families. Clara listened with her hands folded in her lap and her jaw tight. Then Doyle stood and called Clara to testify. She walked to the front. She could feel every eye in the square. She could feel Pike's flat stare. She could feel Crow standing at the edge of the crowd, watching her the way a cat watches a bird that strayed too far from the tree. She didn't look at any of them. She looked at Judge Harlan. "State your name," Doyle said. "Clara Whitmore." "Miss Whitmore, please describe your relationship with the Silver Crest Mining Company." Clara told it all. Her father's death, the debt, the fraudulent transfer, the 3 jobs, the overcharges, the threats, Pike's visit to the ranch, Crow's words on the boardwalk, the notices nailed to widows' doors. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She spoke the way she kept books, precisely, completely, without a single number out of place. Then she presented the evidence, the master ledger, the comparison of stated versus actual interest rates, the phantom fees, the payment records from all 7 families, and finally, the safety inspection records. Silver Crest Mining Company has not filed a mandatory safety inspection with the Territorial Mining Commission in 3 years, Clara said. During that period, 4 miners died in shaft collapses at facilities the company was legally required to inspect. The company failed to inspect them. The company continued to operate them. And the company has been billing the families of dead miners for equipment damaged in collapses that the company's own negligence caused. The square went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a crowd listening. The terrible silence of people hearing something they already suspected, but had never heard spoken aloud. Garrett stood. "Your Honor, Miss Whitmore is not a mining engineer. She is not qualified to assess—" "I'm qualified to read," Clara said. "And the Territorial Mining Code requires annual inspections. The Commission's records show none were filed. That doesn't require engineering expertise. It requires literacy." A murmur ran through the crowd. Judge Harlan raised his hand for quiet. "Mr. Garrett," the judge said, "does the Silver Crest Mining Company dispute that it failed to file the required inspection reports?" Garrett hesitated. It was only a second, but Clara saw it, and she knew the crowd saw it too. "The company will need time to review its internal records." "That's a no, then," Judge Harlan said. "Continue, Miss Whitmore." Crow moved at the edge of the crowd. Clara saw him push forward, his face dark, his hands balled into fists. "This is a circus," Crow shouted. "You're going to let some barmaid with a grudge slander a company that employs half this town?" Judge Harlan looked at him with the flat patience of a man who'd been shouted at by better men than Ezekiel Crow. "Mr. Crow, you will be silent, or you will be removed. This is a judicial proceeding." Crow started forward. 2 miners behind him put hands on his shoulders. Not hostile, firm. The kind of grip that said, "Sit down and we mean it." Crow shook them off, but he stopped moving. Clara stood perfectly still through all of it. When the noise died, she spoke again. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for charity. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for arithmetic. The numbers prove fraud. The records prove negligence. And every family in this square who has buried someone in a Silver Crest mine deserves to know the truth about both." She sat down. The square was quiet. Judge Harlan reviewed the documents for 20 minutes. Nobody moved. The July sun pounded down on the crowd, and not a single person left. When the judge looked up, his face had changed. The patience was still there, but underneath it was something harder. Based on the evidence presented, I am issuing the following orders. First, all debts owed to Silver Crest Mining Company by the families represented in this complaint are suspended pending a full audit by the Territorial Comptroller. Second, the Silver Crest Mining Company is ordered to produce all internal financial records, including debtor accounts, fee schedules, and payment ledgers, within 30 days. Third, the matter of unfiled safety inspections is referred to the Territorial Mining Commission for immediate investigation, with a recommendation for criminal review. He looked at Pike, then at Garrett, then at Crow. And, gentlemen, if I find that any witness, complainant, or family member involved in this case has been subjected to threats, intimidation, or retaliation of any kind, I will hold the Silver Crest Mining Company in contempt of this court, and I will do so with enthusiasm. He struck the table once with his gavel. Clara sat in her chair and felt the world tilt slightly. Not dizzy. Lighter, like something enormous had been lifted off her chest, and she hadn't realized how heavy it was until it was gone. Ruth Hennessy was crying. Margaret Boone was holding her hand. Old Mrs. Carver, whose son had died in the spring collapse, was standing with her chin up and her eyes bright, and she was looking at Clara like she was seeing something she'd given up believing in. Nate was standing at the back of the crowd. He wasn't smiling. He was doing something more. He was looking at her the way you look at someone when you finally understand who they really are. Clara stood up, on legs that felt like they might not hold her. Doyle shook her hand. Ruth grabbed her in a hug that smelled like soap and baby powder and exhaustion. And over Ruth's shoulder, Clara saw Crow walking away. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The set of his shoulders said everything. This wasn't over. But for the first time since her father died, Clara Whitmore had won something real. Something they couldn't take back. Something she'd built not with a revolver or a knife or 3 jobs and 4 hours of sleep, but with the thing she'd always trusted most: the numbers. The numbers didn't lie. And today, neither did justice. The audit took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of territorial comptrollers crawling through Silver Crest's offices like ants through a rotting log. 3 weeks of locked doors and whispered conversations, and company men walking through Carson Flats with their eyes down and their mouths shut. Clara waited. She'd learned how to wait, not passively, the way a prisoner waits, but actively, the way a hunter waits. With her eyes open and her books balanced and her mind turning over every possible outcome, the way a jeweler turns a stone, looking for the flaw that could crack it. She was in the ranch office on a Tuesday afternoon when Billy Pruitt came running from the road. "Rider coming," he said, out of breath. "Looks like the sheriff." Clara stood. She wiped her hands on her skirt, a habit she'd picked up from her father, who used to wipe his hands before delivering news, good or bad, as if clean palms could make the words come easier. Hadley dismounted and tied his horse without hurrying. That was a bad sign. Men who carried good news moved fast. Men who carried complicated news took their time. "Sheriff," Clara said from the porch. Hadley took off his hat. "Miss Whitmore, is Callahan here?" "He's in the north pasture. What's happened?" Hadley climbed the steps and sat in the porch chair like a man whose bones ached. "The Territorial Comptroller filed his report this morning. I rode out as soon as I got word." "And?" "Silver Crest Mining Company has been found in systematic violation of territorial lending statutes. Every debt issued by the company in the last 5 years has been recalculated at the legal rate."
Every overcharge, every phantom fee, every inflated interest payment, all of it has been ordered returned.
Clara gripped the porch rail. All of it? All of it. Judge Harlan signed the order an hour before I left town. The company owes restitution to 31 families, Clara. Not 7. 31. Once the comptroller opened those books, he found it went deeper than anyone knew. 31 families. Clara had started with 7. The numbers had done the rest. "What about the safety inspections?" she asked. Hadley's expression changed. Harder now. "That's the other part. The Territorial Mining Commission has revoked Silver Crest's operating license, effective immediately. All shafts are closed pending a full structural review, and the commission has referred the matter to the territorial prosecutor for criminal charges." Criminal charges against who? Company officers, including Ezekiel Crow. Clara sat down on the porch step. She didn't trust her legs. 31 families, criminal charges, operating license revoked. "There's more," Hadley said. She looked up. Horace Pike turned witness. Pike walked into the comptroller's office yesterday morning with a box of documents and asked for immunity. Apparently, Pike's been keeping his own records. A parallel set of books showing the real numbers versus what the company reported. He's been keeping them for 3 years. Pike was covering himself. Pike was terrified. He knew the company was crooked, and he knew that when it fell apart, they'd make him the fall man. So he kept evidence. And when the audit started, he decided his skin was worth more than his loyalty. Clara stared at the dirt between her boots. Horace Pike, the man with fish eyes who told her that debt doesn't die. The man who'd ridden to this very ranch to threaten her. He'd been keeping records the whole time, not out of conscience, but out of self-preservation. She should have felt satisfied. Instead, she felt something more complicated. Something like exhaustion mixed with grief, mixed with a strange, hollow kind of vindication that tasted like dust. "What about my father's debt?" she asked quietly. Hadley reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He handed it to her. Clara opened it. She read it twice, because the first time the words blurred, and she couldn't be sure she was seeing them right. Official Order of Debt Annulment, Territory of Nevada. In the matter of Whitmore Samuel, deceased. All debts, charges, fees, and liabilities assessed by the Silver Crest Mining Company against the estate and surviving family of Samuel Whitmore are hereby declared null and void, obtained through fraudulent practices and in violation of territorial law. Null and void. $312. 6 months of 3 jobs and 4 hours of sleep, and men grabbing her wrist and a company clerk with dead eyes telling her, "That debt doesn't die." It was gone. Clara folded the paper carefully. She pressed it against her chest with both hands, the way you hold something precious that you're afraid might blow away. "Thank you, Sheriff." Hadley stood. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You did this, Clara. Every bit of it." "I had help." "You had numbers. The help came because you were brave enough to use them." He put on his hat, tipped it once, and rode back toward town. Clara sat on the porch step for a long time after he left. She didn't move. She didn't cry. She just held that paper and breathed. When Nate came back from the north pasture an hour later, she was still sitting there. He dismounted and walked to the porch. He looked at her face and stopped. "Clara?" She held up the paper. He took it. He read it. He read it again. Then he sat down beside her on the step, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and he was quiet for a while. "It's over," he said. "The debt is over. The rest isn't." "What rest?" "Crow is going to be charged. The company is going to fight it. and 31 families are going to need help navigating the restitution process. Most of them can't read their own contracts. You're going to help them. It wasn't a question. He knew her well enough now to know it wasn't a question. Someone has to. Clara, he turned to look at her. You don't owe them anything. I know I don't owe them anything. That's the point. For the first time in my life, I don't owe anyone anything. And that means I get to choose what I do next. Not because I have to, because I want to. Nate was quiet. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her more and more lately. Not like a bookkeeper, not like an employee, not like a woman he was trying to figure out. Like a person he already understood and kept choosing to stand next to. You're something else, Clara Whitmore. I'm a woman with a clean ledger and a bad temper. Don't romanticize it. He almost laughed. It was the closest she'd ever heard him come to laughing. A sound that started in his chest and got caught somewhere in his throat, like something that had been locked up too long and didn't quite remember how to come out. Wouldn't dream of it, he said. That night, Jem Sutter quit. He came to the main house after supper, hat in hand, and stood in the doorway of the kitchen where Clara was drying dishes and Nate was finishing coffee. I'm leaving, Jem said. End of the week. Nate set down his cup. Why? Got an offer from a spread up in Oregon. Better pay, bigger operation. He paused. It's time. You've been here since the beginning, Jem. I know it, and you've been fair. But things are different now, and I reckon I need to be somewhere where I fit better. He looked at Clara when he said it, not with anger, not with resentment. Something more honest than either of those. The plain acknowledgement of a man who knew the ground had shifted under his feet and had decided to walk rather than stumble. Clara dried her hands on the towel. Mr. Sutter. Ma'am? For what it's worth, you're a good cattleman. Billy told me you taught him everything he knows about range management. Jem blinked. Of all the things he'd expected her to say, that clearly wasn't one of them. Billy talks too much, he muttered, but something softened around his eyes. Probably, Clara said, but he wasn't wrong. Jem looked at Nate, then at Clara. Then he put his hat on and nodded once. I'll work through Saturday. Make sure Earl's squared away on the herd count. Appreciated, Mate said. Jem left. His boots were heavy on the porch steps, and neither Clara nor Nate spoke until the sound faded. You didn't have to say that to him, Nate said. I know. He wasn't exactly welcoming to you. No, but he was honest about it, and he's leaving on his own terms. That counts for something. Nate looked at her, that look again, the one that made Clara's chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with corsets or breathing or the summer heat. You keep surprising me, he said. You keep expecting less than I am. That's your problem, not mine. This time he did laugh. A real one, short and rough, like a match striking, but real. Clara turned back to the dishes so he wouldn't see her face. Because she was smiling, and she wasn't ready for him to know how much that laugh meant to her. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Clara's life. Not because anything dramatic happened, the opposite. For the first time in as long as she could remember, there was no crisis. No debt collector at the door, no company clerk with dead eyes, no foreman with fists and threats. There was just the ranch, the work, the heat, and Nate. She caught herself noticing things she shouldn't have been noticing. The way he rolled his sleeves up when he worked on the books with her, revealing forearms that were brown from sun and roped with muscle. The way he said her name, Clara, like it was a word he'd been practicing. The way he left a cup of coffee outside her office door every morning without saying anything about it. She noticed, and she filed it away the way she filed everything. Precisely,
carefully. In a ledger she didn't show anyone. But the ledger was getting full. It was a Thursday night, 3 weeks after the hearing, when the balance tipped. They were sitting on the porch. This had become a habit. After supper, after the books were done, they'd sit and talk about nothing and everything. The ranch, the cattle market, whether Billy Pruitt would ever learn to mend a fence without bending every nail. Small talk that felt like something bigger every time. This night, Nate asked the question he'd never asked. "Why did you stay?" Clara looked at him. "Stay where?" "Here, at the ranch. The debt's gone. You could go anywhere. You could go back east. You could open your own business. You've got the mind for it, and now you've got the reputation. Half the territory knows your name." "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "That's not what I said." "Then what are you saying?" Nate took off his hat and held it in both hands. He looked at it like it held instructions he'd forgotten how to read. "I'm saying that every person who's worked for me has left eventually. The drunks, the gamblers, the ones who stole from me, and the ones who just got bored. I've been waiting for you to leave since the day you got here. And you haven't. And I don't understand why." Clara was quiet for a long time. The night was warm and the stars were out, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote was singing the same song it had been singing for 1,000 years. "When I was working 3 jobs," she said, "I used to lie in bed at night and think about what it would feel like to be somewhere where nobody was trying to take something from me. Not my money, not my time, not my dignity. Just a place where I could work and be paid fairly and go to sleep knowing that tomorrow wouldn't be worse than today." She looked at him. "This is that place, Nate. You gave me that. Not charity, not rescue. A fair wage and a locked door and the space to be good at something. Nobody's ever given me that before." "That's not a reason to stay. That's a reason to be grateful." "Gratitude runs out." "It's not gratitude." The words hung in the air between them. Clara felt her heart doing something it hadn't done in years, beating fast, not from fear, not from anger, but from the terrifying vulnerability of saying something true to someone who might actually hear it. Nate set his hat down on the step beside him. He turned to face her fully. "What is it, then?" Clara looked at this man. This quiet, stubborn, sunburned, honest man who'd lost a ranch to drought and rebuilt one from nothing. Who'd stood up in a saloon for a woman he didn't know. Who'd driven cattle to market and fought a mining company and left coffee outside her door every morning without asking for a single thing in return. "I think you know what it is," she said. "I want to hear you say it." "Why? So you can say it back?" "So I know I'm not imagining it." Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. Not painfully. The way ice cracks in spring. Necessary, inevitable, and making way for something that had been waiting underneath all winter. "I'm staying because of you," she said. "Because you're the first man I've met who treats me like a person and not a problem. Because you argue with me like I'm your equal and leave me coffee like I'm worth thinking about. Because when Horace Pike showed up at your door, you didn't get angry at me for bringing trouble. You got angry at him for causing it. And because when I sat down beside you with a ledger full of numbers that could ruin a mining company, you didn't tell me to be careful. You asked me what I needed." She was breathing hard, like she'd been running, which, in a way, she had. Running from this moment for weeks. Nate didn't say anything. He reached over and took her hand, the same way he had that night at the kitchen table. Palm up, an offer. She put her hand in his and felt his fingers close around hers, and the warmth of it went through her like whiskey, like sunlight, like something she'd forgotten the name of. "I lost a ranch once," he said, his voice rough. "Lost land, lost cattle, lost everything I'd built. And I told myself I'd never hold on to anything that hard again, because losing it almost killed me. Then you walked onto this property with one bag and a revolver and a temper like a brush fire. And I thought, well, there goes that plan. Clara laughed. It surprised her, a real laugh, not the bitter kind she'd been using for 6 months. The kind that comes from somewhere warm and genuine and alive. That's the worst declaration I've ever heard, she said. I'm a rancher, not a poet. I noticed. He squeezed her hand. I'm not asking you for anything, Clara. Not tonight. Not ever, unless you offer it. But I want you to know that when I asked you to stay, I wasn't asking as your employer. I know.
And when you said you were staying because of me, I meant it. Then that's enough. For now. That's more than enough. They sat on the porch in the warm dark, holding hands like two people who'd both survived something terrible, and had finally found the thing that made surviving worth it. Clara leaned her shoulder against his. Just barely. Just enough. Nate. Yeah? Don't stop leaving the coffee. Wasn't planning to. The criminal charges against Ezekiel Crow came down the following month. 4 counts of criminal negligence. The territorial prosecutor, armed with Pike's records and Clara's evidence, built a case that even Silver Crest's expensive lawyers couldn't dismantle. Clara was called to testify again. This time, it wasn't a public hearing on a courthouse porch. It was a formal trial in Carson City, in a real courtroom, with a jury of 12 men who looked at her like they couldn't decide if she was brave or crazy. She told the truth. That was all. She told it with numbers and dates and documents. And when the company's lawyer tried to discredit her, tried to call her a disgruntled debtor, a woman with a grudge, a barmaid playing at law, she looked him in the eye and said something that made the courtroom go still. My father went into your client's mine every day for 11 years. He did it because he loved me, and he had no choice. Your client took his labor, took his health, took his life, and then took his money. I'm not disgruntled, sir. I'm his daughter, and I'm not playing at anything. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. All 4 counts. Crow was sentenced to 8 years in the territorial prison. The Silver Crest Mining Company was ordered to pay restitution to all 31 families, totaling over $14,000. The company's Nevada operations were permanently shuttered. Clara heard the verdict standing beside Ruth Hennessy, who held her hands so tight it hurt. It's done, Ruth whispered. Yeah, Clara said. It's done. Outside the courthouse, Nate was waiting by the wagon. He didn't ask how it went. He could see it on her face. Take me home, Clara said. It was the first time she'd called the ranch home. She saw him register it, a flicker in his gray eyes, quick as a heartbeat. Yes, ma'am, he said. The ride back was long and quiet, and Clara spent most of it leaning against Nate's shoulder with her eyes closed. Not sleeping, just breathing, just being. Just existing in a world where the debt was gone, and the company was broken, and the man beside her smelled like leather and coffee and something that felt, impossibly, like safety. When they reached the ranch, Nate pulled the wagon to a stop, and Clara didn't move. You all right? He asked. I'm all right. She opened her eyes. I'm better than all right. I'm free. She said it like she was testing the word, like she'd heard it before, but never believed it applied to her. Free. No debt. No threat. No company clerk. No foreman. No midnight shifts at the rusted spur. Just the ranch.
the work, the wide Nevada sky, and Nate. Clara climbed down from the wagon. She stood in the yard and looked at the house, the office, the barn, the corral where the remaining cattle milled and load. She'd helped save this place. She'd helped save 31 families. She'd helped put a corrupt man in prison and shut down a company that had been grinding people to dust for years. And she was 23 years old. She turned to Nate. He was still on the wagon, holding the reins, watching her with the patience of a man who'd learned that the best things come to people who don't grab. "Ask me," she said. "Ask you what?" "The thing you've been wanting to ask me. The thing you said you'd never ask unless I offered. I'm offering." Nate set down the reins. He climbed off the wagon and stood in front of her. Close. Closer than they'd ever been, except for hands held on porches and shoulders leaned together in the dark. "Clara Whitmore," he said. "Will you stay? Not as my bookkeeper, not as my employee, as my partner, in this ranch, in this life, in whatever comes next." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Callahan?" "It's a question. The proposal comes later, if you'll have it." Clara looked up at him. Gray eyes, sunburned face, steady hands. A man who'd lost everything and built it back. A man who'd stood up in a saloon for a stranger and never once acted like she owed him for it. "I'll have it," she said, "but not today." "When?" "When I'm ready. When I've had time to know that I'm choosing this because I want it and not because I need it. I spent 6 months needing things, Nate. I want to spend a while wanting them instead." He nodded. He understood. She could see it in his face. Not disappointment, not frustration, but the deep, steady recognition of a man who knew that the woman standing in front of him would never choose anything halfway. "However long you need," he said. "It won't be long." "Take your time." "I said it won't be long." That almost laugh again. That sound she was learning to love. "All right, Clara." "All right, Nate." She walked into the house. He stayed in the yard, unhitching the horses. And if he was smiling, she didn't see it. But she knew. The same way she knew numbers. The same way she knew ledgers and interest rates and the exact moment when a column of figures tipped from loss to gain. She knew. 3 months she made him wait. Not out of cruelty, not out of doubt. Out of something Clara Whitmore had never had the luxury of before. The space to be sure. She woke every morning in the room with a lock she no longer checked and the window she no longer measured for escape. She drank the coffee Nate left outside her door. She balanced the ranch books. She rode into Carson Flats twice a week to help the 31 families navigate restitution paperwork, because territorial courts moved slow and bureaucrats spoke a language most people couldn't read. And every night she sat on the porch with Nate and talked about cattle prices and water rights and whether Billy Pruitt would ever stop tripping over his own boots. And every night the space between them on that bench got a little smaller. He never pushed, not once. Not a word, not a look, not a gesture that said, "Hurry up." He just showed up. Every morning, every evening, steady as the sunrise and twice as reliable. It drove her absolutely crazy. "You're too patient," she told him one night, 3 weeks into her self-imposed waiting period. Is that a complaint? It's an observation. Normal men would have asked again by now. I ain't normal men. I've noticed. He sipped his coffee. You'll tell me when you're ready. I've got cattle to keep me busy in the meantime. You're comparing me to cattle. I'm comparing waiting for you to waiting for cattle. The cattle are easier. She threw a dish towel at his head. He caught it without spilling his coffee. And the look on his face, half surprise, half something warmer, made her chest ache in a way she was starting to recognize. It was the ache of wanting something you already had, but hadn't claimed yet. She was falling in love with Nathaniel Callahan.
She'd probably been falling since the night he stood up in the rusted spur and said, "Let her go," in a voice that expected to be obeyed. But falling and choosing were different things, and Clara Whitmore did not fall into anything. She walked in with her eyes open, and her books balanced, and her terms clearly stated. That was what the 3 months were for, not to test him, to test herself, to make sure that when she said yes, it wasn't because he'd saved her, or because the ranch felt safe, or because the alternative was going back to 3 jobs and 4 hours of sleep. It had to be because she wanted him, just him, the man, not the rescue. The test came on a Saturday in late September, when a letter arrived from a lawyer in San Francisco. Clara opened it at the kitchen table while Nate was out checking fences. She read it once. Then she sat very still and read it again. The Silver Crest Mining Company's parent corporation, based in San Francisco, was offering a settlement. Not to the 31 families. That restitution was already court-ordered and moving forward. This was personal. A private offer to Clara Whitmore specifically. $5,000. In exchange for her silence. A signed agreement that she would not speak publicly about the case, would not assist in any further legal actions against the company's affiliates, and would not publish or distribute the financial analysis she'd compiled. $5,000. More money than Clara had ever imagined holding. More than Nate's ranch was worth. Enough to buy land, start a business, leave Nevada territory, and never look back. She stared at the number until it blurred. Then she heard Nate's boots on the porch. He came in, saw her face, and stopped. What happened? She handed in the letter. He read it standing up. His jaw tightened the way it always did when something made him angry. Not the explosive kind of angry, but the deep, slow kind that burned clean. $5,000, he said, for my silence. You're not going to take it. How do you know that? He looked at her. Because you didn't tear it up before I got here, which means you're thinking about it. And you only think about things you've already decided against. If you were going to take it, you'd have already signed it. Clara stared at him. You know me too well. Not well enough, not yet. He set the letter down. But I know this, that money would change your life. It would change my life by making me the kind of person who can be bought. And I already know what that feels like. I watched the mining company buy silence from every widow and every miner and every clerk in Carson Flats for years. I won't be another entry in their ledger. Then don't. I'm not going to. I know. Then why did you say you don't know me well enough? Nate pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Because I know what you'll do. I don't always know what it cost you. And I'd like to. Clara looked at this man, this infuriating, patient, steady man, and felt the last wall inside her crack. It costs me everything, she said quietly. Every time I choose the right thing over the easy thing, it costs me something. Turning down that money costs me security. Fighting the company cost me sleep and safety and 6 months of peace. Standing up in that courtroom cost me every ounce of courage I had. And sitting here right now, trying to decide if I'm ready to love you, that costs me more than all of it combined. Why? Because if I love you, I have something to lose, and I've spent my whole life learning how to survive losing things. I don't know how to survive having them. Nate reached across the table. He didn't take her hand. He laid his palm flat on the wood between them, the same gesture as before. An offer, not a demand.
You don't have to survive having me, Clara. You just have to let me be here." She looked at his hand, at the calluses and the sun-dark skin, and the steady, unmoving certainty of it. She put her hand on top of his. "I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" "Ask me again." Nate's breath caught. She heard it, a small, sharp intake that he tried to cover by clearing his throat, and the fact that he couldn't quite manage it told her more about what this meant to him than any words could have. "Clara Whitmore," he said, "will you marry me?" "Yes." One word. No conditions. No clauses. No 6-month minimum with 30 days notice. Just yes.
Nate's hand closed around hers, and he stood, and he pulled her to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there in the kitchen, holding hands across the table like two people who'd finally found the thing they'd been looking for and couldn't quite believe it was real. Then he kissed her. It wasn't a dramatic kiss. It wasn't the kind of kiss that happens in storybooks, with swept-back hair and orchestral swells. It was a quiet kiss, a careful kiss, the kiss of a man who'd been waiting 3 months and wanted to make sure she knew he'd wait 3 more if she asked. She kissed him back, not carefully, the way she did everything, fully, fiercely, and with complete commitment to the outcome. When they pulled apart, Nate looked slightly dazed. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. "That was worth waiting for." "Everything about me is worth waiting for, Mr. Callahan. You should know that by now." He laughed, that real laugh she'd learned to love, rough and short and genuine.
"Yes, ma'am, I believe I do."
They married in October, not in a church. Clara didn't trust institutions that took donations from mining companies. Not in a courthouse. She'd spent enough time in courthouses. They married on the ranch, under open sky, with Judge Hadley officiating because Tom Hadley had gotten himself appointed Justice of the Peace the month before, specifically so he could perform the ceremony. "Seemed like the least I could do," Hadley said when Clara asked him why. "You cleaned up my town. I can say some words over your wedding." The guests were few, but real. Ruth Hennessy came with all 4 children. Margaret Boone brought a cake she'd baked herself. Old Mrs. Carver sat in a chair someone had carried from the house and watched the whole thing with bright eyes and a handkerchief she didn't need because she was smiling too hard to cry. Billy Pruitt stood as Nate's witness, wearing a borrowed coat that was 2 sizes too big and a grin that was 3 sizes too wide. Earl Dawson stood at the back, arms crossed, nodding slowly, the way a man nods when he sees something he always expected but is still pleased to confirm. Arthur Doyle came from Elko. He shook Clara's hand before the ceremony and said, "For the record, Miss Whitmore, you're the best client I've ever had." "For the record, Mr. Doyle, I'm the only client who did half your job for you." That too. Clara wore a new dress, blue, like the one she'd worn to the hearing. But this one was made for her, sewn by a woman in town who'd refused payment because Clara had helped her sister recover 3 years of stolen interest. Nate wore a clean shirt and his good boots, and an expression Clara had never seen on him before. Not serious, not guarded. Open. The face of a man who'd decided to stop protecting himself from hope. The ceremony was short. Hadley spoke the words. Nate said, "I do," in a voice that was steady but thick. Clara said, "I do," in a voice that was clear and certain, and carried across the yard to where the cattle grazed and the wind blew, and the land stretched out in every direction, empty and full at the same time. They kissed. Everyone clapped. Billy Pruitt whistled. Mrs. Carver finally did cry. And Clara Whitmore became Clara Callahan, not because she needed a new name, because she chose one. The first year was hard. Not bad. Hard. The way good things are hard when you're building them from scratch, with two stubborn people who both think they're right. They argued about money. Clara wanted to invest in additional water infrastructure. Nate wanted to expand the herd first. "You can't water cattle you don't have," he said. "You can't grow cattle you can't keep alive," she said. They argued for 3 days. Clara pulled out projections. Nate pulled out experience. Clara showed him the numbers. Nate showed her the land. Back and forth, stubborn against stubborn, until Earl Dawson finally walked into the middle of it and said, "For the love of God, do both. Dig the well first, buy the cattle second. It's not complicated." They looked at each other. They looked at Earl. "When did you get smart?" Nate asked. "When you two got dumb," Earl said, and walked away. They dug the well. They bought the cattle. Earl was right. It wasn't complicated. But the arguing didn't stop. It just changed shape. They argued about fence lines and breeding stock and whether Billy Pruitt deserved a raise. And every argument ended the same way, with Clara proving her point with numbers and Nate conceding with a grumble, and both of them somehow closer afterward than they'd been before. Because the arguing wasn't the problem. The arguing was the proof. Proof that they were equals. Proof that neither of them had married a person who'd roll over and agree just to keep peace. Proof that the partnership was real. Clara understood something about marriage that most people learned too late. It wasn't about never fighting. It was about fighting fair. About knowing that the person across the table loved you enough to disagree with you honestly, and respected you enough to change their mind when you were right. Nate changed his mind a lot. So did Clara. They were both better for it. The second year, Clara started the cooperative. It began small, a table in the Carson Flats General Store where she sat twice a week and helped women read their contracts. Widows mostly at first. Women like Ruth, who'd been handed papers they didn't understand and signed them because they didn't know they had a choice. Clara taught them to read the fine print. She taught them to calculate interest. She taught them to demand receipts and keep records and never, ever trust a number they hadn't verified themselves. "Numbers don't lie," she told Ruth's oldest daughter, the girl who'd been peeling potatoes the first time Clara walked into their house. The girl was 11 now and had her mother's fierce eyes. People lie. Companies lie. But numbers, if you learn to read them right, numbers always tell you the truth. The cooperative grew. By the end of the second year, 14 women were members. They pooled resources to hire a lawyer, not Doyle, who was too expensive for regular work, but a young woman named Sarah Marsh, who'd come west from Philadelphia with a law degree and a chip on her shoulder the size of the territory. Sarah Marsh was 26, sharp as a tack, and had been told by every firm in Philadelphia that women didn't practice law. "Watch me," she'd said. Clara liked her immediately. Together, they built something that had never existed in Carson Flats. A place where women could get honest financial advice without paying for it. Where contracts were reviewed before they were signed. Where widows and working women and minors' daughters could walk in and be treated like people who deserved to understand the papers that governed their lives. Nate watched it happen with the quiet pride of a man who knew he'd married someone extraordinary and had the good sense not to get in her way. "You're changing this town," he told her one night. "I'm teaching this town arithmetic. The change is their doing. You're too modest." "I'm never modest. I'm accurate." He kissed the top of her head. "Yes, ma'am." The third year, they had a daughter. Clara chose the name Lillian, after no one. She wanted her daughter to carry a name that didn't come with a story. No dead grandparents, no family legacy, no debt. Just a name, clean and new. Lillian Callahan came into the world screaming, which Clara considered a good sign. She'd spent the first 23 years of her own life being too quiet, too careful, too measured. She wanted her daughter to start loud and stay that way. Nate held the baby like she was made of glass and gunpowder simultaneously, terrified of breaking her, terrified of what she might become. Clara watched him cradle Lillian against his broad chest, his rough hands gentle as water, and felt something she hadn't known she was capable of. Not love. She already knew love. She'd learned it slowly, through coffee cups and ledgers and arguments about cattle. This was something deeper, something that had roots and branches and would outlast both of them. "She's got your eyes," Nate said, looking down at the baby. "She's got your stubbornness," Clara said. "She wouldn't come out until she was good and ready. Takes after her mother." "Don't you dare." He grinned, that full, unguarded grin she still saw too rarely. "Clara Callahan, I love you something fierce." "I know you do. Now give me my daughter before you drop her." "I'm not going to drop her." "You're shaking." "I'm not shaking. That's the baby." "The baby is asleep, Nate." He looked down. Lillian was, in fact, sound asleep, utterly unconcerned with the two people who would spend the rest of their lives trying to deserve her. Nate sat on the edge of the bed and leaned against Clara, the baby between them, and they stayed like that for a long time, not talking, just breathing, just being a family. The fourth year, Horace Pike came back. Clara was in the cooperative office when the door opened and a thin man in a thin coat stepped inside. He looked older, smaller, like a man who'd been hollowed out by the thing he'd survived. Clara's hand went still on the ledger. "Mr. Pike." Mrs. Callahan," he corrected himself. His voice was the same, flat, careful, but there was something underneath it now that hadn't been there before. Something broken. "What do you want?" "I want to work." Clara stared at him. "You want to work? Here?" "I heard you help people with financial matters. Contracts. Accounts. I know accounts. I know them better than anyone in this territory." "You know them because you cooked them for a company that killed people." Pike flinched. Actually flinched. Clara had never seen him show any reaction to anything, and the flinch told her more than any words could have. "I did," he said. "I kept 2 sets of books for 3 years. I watched them overcharge widows and orphans, and I said nothing, because I was afraid. I was a coward, Mrs. Callahan. I know what I was." "Then why are you here?" "Because after I testified, no one would hire me. No mining company, no bank, no merchant. I'm the man who turned on his employer. In this territory, that makes me worse than a thief." "You're asking me for sympathy?" "I'm asking you for a chance to use what I know for something other than fraud. I'm asking you to let me help the people I helped hurt." Clara looked at him for a long time. She thought about his fish eyes in the company office. She thought about the paper he'd slid across the desk. She thought about his voice saying, "Your father is dead, and the debt is not." She thought about all of it. And then she thought about something her father used to say. Samuel Whitmore, who'd worked 11 years in a mine that killed him, used to come home covered in dust and sit at the kitchen table and tell his daughter, "Everyone deserves a fair count, Clara. Even the ones who shorted you. Monday," she said, 8 o'clock. "You'll work for Sarah Marsh, reviewing contracts. You'll be paid the same as everyone else. And if I catch you cooking so much as a grocery list, I'll put you in front of Judge Hadley myself." Pike nodded, his thin lips pressed together, and for a moment Clara thought he might cry. He didn't, but something in his face changed, loosened, like a knot that had been tied too long, finally giving way. "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan. Don't thank me, thank my father. He's the one who taught me that people are worth more than their worst mistakes." Pike left. Clara sat at her desk and pressed her hands flat on the wood until they stopped shaking. Then she went back to the numbers. 5 years after Clara Whitmore walked into the Rusted Spur saloon with a bleeding hand and 3 jobs and a dead man's debt, she rode a wagon out to the old Silver Crest mine site with her husband beside her and her daughter asleep in her lap. The mine was closed, had been for years. The shafts were sealed. The buildings were empty. The desert was taking it back, the way the desert always takes back what doesn't belong. Clara climbed down from the wagon. Nate took Lillian, who stirred but didn't wake. Clara walked to the mine entrance, the main shaft, the one her father had entered every morning for 11 years. She stood there for a long time. She thought about Samuel Whitmore, his dusty hands, his tired eyes, his voice at the kitchen table, counting out loud for her, teaching her the language of numbers before she could read words. She thought about the last morning she'd seen him, the way he'd kissed the top of her head and said, "Be good," and she'd said, "Be careful," and neither of them had known it was the last time. She thought about the bill, $312, the number that had nearly crushed her. The number that had, in the end, made her who she was. "They tried to bury us," she said. Not to Nate, not to anyone. To the mine, to the ghosts, to the territory itself. Nate walked up beside her, Lillian on his hip. He looked at the sealed shaft, at the crumbling timber, at the silence of a place that had once eaten men alive. "And we built something they couldn't own," he said. Clara looked at her husband, at her daughter, at the land that stretched in every direction, harsh and beautiful and indifferent to everything except survival. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded paper. The debt annulment. She'd carried it for 5 years, not because she needed to remember, but because she'd needed proof that it was real. She didn't need proof anymore. She unfolded the paper, held it up, and let the wind take it. It sailed across the desert, tumbling over scrub and dust and the bones of a company that had tried to own people and failed. Nate watched it go. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." Clara took Lillian from his arms and held her daughter against her chest. "I don't need a piece of paper to remember what I survived. I just need to look at what I built." She turned away from the mine. She walked back to the wagon. She climbed up, settled Lillian in her lap, and waited for Nate to take the reins. "Take us home," she said. He clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon rolled forward. The mine shrank behind them. The desert opened ahead, wide and bright and unforgiving and full of possibility. Clara Whitmore Callahan didn't look back. She'd already decided, a long time ago, that everything she needed was forward. And she was right. She'd always been right. Not because she was lucky, or because she was rescued, or because a man on a horse had ridden in and saved her, but because she was a woman who could read numbers and face down liars, and stand in a courtroom and speak the truth when the truth was the most dangerous thing in the room. Because she was Clara. And Clara Whitmore didn't get buried. She rose.